A7S III versus ZV-1, low light. Let's go. Hey everyone, this is Aris and welcome to the channel. So I've been a Sony user for several years now. I've owned the A6000, the A6500, the A6400 for the flip-up screen, then the Sony ZV-1 and now the A7S III. Maybe it's time to sell one of the old ones. I have always been very happy with these cameras from day one. The A6000 I wanted for stills and I wanted to shoot my kids and it served the purpose perfectly. Then I started transitioning to video and the A6500 was the better choice at the time because I needed stabilization. I started using manual lenses and that opened up a world of opportunities for me. Then I started vlogging and I decided that the A6400 was the better choice for me. Then I started taking my camera constantly outside and the ZV-1 seemed to be the most ergonomic choice because it was in my pocket all the time and it had a good microphone on top and a very good lens. But there was something about it that fell short when it came to grain and low light capabilities, and during the pandemic I started working more and more on my voice acting during the day and I needed to go out more towards the end of the day when you don't have that much light, and that required a better camera, and that's when I started seeing the limitations of the ZV-1. Don't get me wrong, it's a perfect camera for creators if you can get, good enough light. And that's when the A7S III came out, and I was kind of immediately in love with it.
There's only one camera that I know of that can shoot at this hour with pristine quality. And it's not the ZV-1, it's the A7S III. One can only dream.
So around New Year's 2021, I made the purchase and I placed the order and I expected it to arrive for quite some time. I bought it from a place called Fotoagora in Greek, which was wonderful enough to help me with the order, and they were very patient with me and taking my calls every week, asking how's it going, do we have the lens, do we have the camera. They were very sweet and very, very helpful with everything. I bought it from them and here it is. I think Sony has been doing a very good job of dealing with grain in low light, so their ISOs are working wonderfully. And I've noticed that since my first camera, since the A6000. I haven't tried too many brands, too many cameras. I also own a Fuji X100F, as you know, and I've seen images produced from lots of other cameras in comparisons online, and also from friends of mine who have sent me footage and pictures from other brands like Nikon or Canon and some Fuji. And I have decided that Sony is my brand and I'm sticking with it. However, these two cameras that we're looking at today, the ZV-1 and the A7S III, they are the two extremes of the spectrum as far as Sony cameras go. From the higher end, so to speak, cameras, because you get all these point-and-shoot ones, the smaller ones, the cheaper ones. So the A7S III is the best camera that you can get in low light, and the ZV-1 is the worst camera that you can get in low light. And spoiler alert, this test sort of proves that Sony is the king of low light. As far as specs go, the Sony ZV-1 maxes out its ISO at 12,800, and the A7S III maxes out its ISO at 409,600, which is kind of crazy. In how many situations will a vlogger need such a high ISO? It's pretty debatable. So the Sony ZV-1 is more than enough in most cases, for me or for anyone else out there creating YouTube videos. I know in this video we're talking about low light, but as far as bright light, or lots of light goes, the A7S III goes up until ISO 80. So the lowest ISO value actually allows you to use a wider depth of field, like a wider aperture. Then again, the ZV-1 has an internal ND filter, which is also really handy outdoors. But more of these differences at a later video when I compare the two cameras. For now, let's try to stick to the comparison in low light. So in the last video, I was in my car in fairly low light, pretty low light conditions. It was pretty dark, and I was shooting both with the A7S III and the ZV-1 and here are the shots in comparison. On your left, you're going to have the A7S III at all times, and on your right, the ZV-1. At times, I will be zooming in, punching in, as we say, at 300% so that you can see the grain for yourselves, because YouTube otherwise mushes everything up so that it can help creators. But that's not the real image produced out of these cameras. So by zooming in, we can really pixel peep and see the differences. Okay, let's get to it.
We are beginning with the A7S III at ISO 80. This, of course, is a ridiculous value for dark conditions. But since we are comparing the two cameras in all ISOs, it's worth mentioning that the ZV-1 does not go so low. The A7S III then moves to ISO 100 and then at 125, which is the base ISO for the ZV-1, so here it is on the right. Let's skip a couple of stops and move to 1250. We need to remember that the A7S III was shooting at f1.4, while the ZV-1 is at f1.8, which is its max aperture. The A7S III is an interchangeable lens camera, and the lens used for this test was the 24mm f1.4 G Master. The ZV-1 is a fixed camera lens. As we go up, notice how the ZV-1 falls short not just in the grain department, but also the general mushiness of the image. It's not that it lacks depth of field or background separation, but it seems as if the camera sensor is being driven to its limits, and it is producing a painting-like effect. The subject and foreground lose definition and clarity, and the lines are less articulated, with shapes blending into one another. I make it sound worse than it is. It's not until you juxtapose it against a camera like the A7S III that you start noticing such details. The ZV-1 is a great camera. Maxing out the ZV-1's ISO setting at 12,800, it is still retaining its autofocus capabilities impressively well. The grain can be bearable and even sometimes add to the flavor of the shot as an aesthetic choice. I have seen several horror movies utilize grain to great effect, but the white balance is falling apart. I had never realized how much my images could be affected by this green tint at these settings on the ZV-1. Meanwhile, the A7S III has merely reached its second ISO base here. Any grain it had accumulated up until now is effectively gone. The autofocus is working great, the colors are very realistic and beautiful, and the dynamic range is stellar. Overall, the image is stunning.
At this point, the comparison should practically be over. As fair as it could be, that's the maximum settings for the ZV-1 and the equivalent settings for the A7S III. But since we are doing a low light test, let's see how the A7S III can go even further compared to the ZV-1 if we keep raising the ISO, because this is not the maximum potential of this camera.
For the sake of our initial argument, let's keep raising the ISO setting on the A7S III to the point where the amount of grain we can see is fairly equal to the one on the ZV-1 at its maximum ISO setting. This, of course, is very subjective, so your mileage may vary. And right about here, at ISO 128,000, 10 times the number on the ZV-1, my eyes are perceiving approximately the same amount of grain, albeit at a very, very different brightness. At 409,600 ISO, the A7S III has finally reached its limit. This is not the perfect test for this camera. Had I known how far I can push it, I would have chosen an even darker environment. Maybe in a future video? Who knows? Would you be interested? Let me know.
And there you have it. Two great cameras, a little one and a beast of a camera, battling it out on ISO settings and low light performance. This is by no means a very scientific test. It was just my personal perceived experience of these two cameras and the settings and the images they produce. I believe that my personal quest for the perfect camera has come to an end with this one, the A7S III. I will definitely not stop using my ZV-1. I don't think that the A7 III is a complete replacement of that one, in the sense that it is so very portable that I can keep it in my pocket all the time. But when it comes to the main camera for these videos, the A7S III is the one that I will be using from now on. Hope you enjoyed this test, hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, subscribe below, hit the like button, leave a comment down below. Let me know what you enjoyed, what you didn't, what you would like me to do next. And I'll see you guys on the next video. Till next time, remember, be kind.